In the last episode, I lied to you. I told you we were going to bolt on twin turbos, but first, I want to push this 5-liter Whipple as far as it will go. You want to see what happens? Hey, it's Gale Banks. We're here in dyno cell number 1 at Banks Power, and today we're going to take this blown intercooled 427 Duramax to its limit. I want to know how much total power I can make without the turbos, just the blower and intercooler. And I want to know about the throttle response. That's why the blower is on the engine to begin with. Before we fire this thing, let me set the stage because we've made some changes from last time. Last time, the intercooler water flow rate was 36 gallons a minute. We've upped it to 60 gallons a minute because we know we're going to dump some more heat into that intercooler. As far as the supercharger is concerned, it was 50% over engine speed. Now it's 100% over. And instead of running 3,200 RPM, we're going to run 5,000 RPM engine, which will give us 10,000 RPM blower. So we expect some more manifold pressure here. Aaron, I'm going to stop using the word boost. We're not going to talk about boost. We'll talk about how much pressure we add through the blower, how much pressure we lose through the intercooler, and we'll talk about the absolute pressure, the MAP in the intake manifold. So manifold absolute pressure. So the only time we'll talk PSI is where there's a difference. We're really interested in the manifold air density. That's what supercharging and intercooling are all about. Not to mention a good cold air intake system. All right, Aaron, let's fire this thing up. So once we get this thing running, I want to talk about the fact that we have manifold pressure, positive manifold pressure above ambient at idle. Right now, the boost air system at 1,000 RPM is making 6.5 PSI of positive pressure above ambient. We know we've got positive manifold pressure at idle, way above a pair of turbos. The next thing I want to look at is throttle response. Now we're going to whack it and see how it takes the throttle. The whole idea here was the blower will really accelerate the engine. So let's see if it does. That's nice. That seems quite sweet. Let's try one more, just quick. That's taking the throttle pretty well. One more time. Okay. That's just like free revving it.
Bouncing off the limiter.
Huh? It was bouncing off the limiter at about 5,300 RPM right now. So I think that's pretty damn successful, guys. I don't know what our RPM gain per second is. When you do that, we might be able to get it out of the log data.
Yep.
And that'll give us some sort of a comparison to a blown gasoline engine. But I've never seen a turbo engine respond like that. Now we're idling, and this is the other thing I wanted to look at, is how are we doing for manifold air density at idle? Normally, with turbos, the ambient air density, which right now is 72.7 pounds per 1,000 cubic feet, would kind of be what you'd have in the intake manifold. But our boost air system, the blower and intercooler at idle, are producing another 30 pounds of density just at idle at 1,000 RPM. So our manifold air density is 103 pounds per 1,000. That's fantastic. I mean, we're picking up 40% air density at idle. Wow, pretty remarkable. Now I'd like to build a little more heat in this thing. Let's go ahead and bring it up to about 100 horsepower, 2,400, 2,500 RPM. And I'm going to explain something that's incredibly new here. What we've got in the 4 iDash data monsters on top here is what I call CARS. This is the Charge Air Rating System. It looks at ambient and its contribution to manifold air density, the supercharger or turbocharger and its contribution, the intercooler's contribution, and of course, what's in the intake manifold in terms of air density. So for ambient, that's the first gauge in this stack up. Now, by the way, this could be on multiple screens on the same gauge, and you could be data logging it and changing screens as you're going on. This is stuff you get if you install an air mouse. That gets all that data that's on the first gauge. Second gauge, I've kind of stacked two together. On the second gauge, we have the compressor on the left and the intercooler on the right. So when you combine the two together, that's the boost air density, and that's the boost air system. I separated out the compressor and the intercooler. Now we're combining them together, which you probably do in your car or your truck. The screen on the far right is the payday. The top reading is manifold air density, and that is what we're looking for. Manifold air density speaks directly to horsepower and torque. Remember this, all things being equal, the guy with the highest manifold air density wins. We're going to get after it. We're going to now go to 5,000 RPM, and we're going to see what the hell this thing makes at 18:1 air-fuel ratio. Let's go for it, Aaron. Data loggers are on. The flashing green light tells you we're logging. 5,000 RPM. We're a little over 5,000. Oh, Jesus. Whoa, I saw 666 horsepower. Oh, I don't know about that, guys. I'll tell you this, I like the number. I mean, that's some serious horsepower for a blown diesel, don't you think? Wow. I love the fact that we're making boost air density, damn near 30 pounds of boost air density at idle. I just love the hell out of this. And bear in mind, these things don't idle at 1,000 RPM in the monster trucks. They idle those 540-inch Chevys way above 1,000 RPM, and they have real loose torque converters. So when they whack them, they're not loaded till they hit like 4,000, 4,500 RPM engine speed. I want to try, after we run this 5,500 RPM, if we still have an engine to test, I want to try the throttle whack from like 1,500 RPM and see what that looks like. Looks like we've got a rev limit at 5,200 RPM. So Aaron's working the calibration to see what's holding us back. You can use a narwhal tusk to fight terrorism. The word is out. Narwhals are so awesome. Oh, well, a little comic relief, you see. Okay, let's see what 5,500 will bring us 18:1 air fuel. That'll be our comparative point. The air-fuel ratio will be our comparative point. A little more timing. We'll see what we do for rail pressure. Keep coming. That's it? Huh?
That was 18 to 1.
18 to 1?
Yep.
I think we're past the horsepower peak. We ran 18 to 1 at 5,000. We got 666. 18 to 1 at 5,500. We were north of 600 horsepower at that point. I think we know where we're at. It revs nicely to 5,600 RPM. The last thing I want to try is bring it up to 1,500 RPM and do a wide open throttle slam. Let's see how it responds.
Okay.
Let it stabilize at 1,500.
You know we can't do that, right?
Huh?
You know we can't do that, right?
No, I don't know we can't do that.
We can't do wide open throttle because it'll be the same thing where it was before. We can do the same amount of throttle we did before.
Well, just push it as far as it'll go. What are you telling me?
What I'm saying is that the way that I've got the cal set up
Yeah.
is it'll overfuel if I go wide open. And you don't want that.
How much will it overfuel?
A lot. Because I mean, that was maybe 70% pedal.
Yeah.
So you wouldn't want to go to...
Okay, the cow's real fat on top.
Yes.
So go to 1,500 RPM, whack it, and pull out of it.
Sure.
I just want to see RPM per second.
Sure.
You know, 1,500 to 5,000. When you see fives, pull back.
Sure.
All right, which is going to happen pretty quick. But let's start at 1,500. This is just informational. I want to get RPM change per second versus throttle position because we can idle it at 1,500 RPM in the truck, or even maybe even 2,000. Depends on the torque converter. We now know we have an operating range to 55 or 5,600. It didn't miss a lick.
It seemed like when we were running out of the 5,500 was fuel. Our rail pressure was dropping pretty quickly.
Oh, was it?
I don't think the pumps like that kind of speed.
The pumps don't like the speed. I think you're right. And if that's the case, we haven't found it. We are currently running 2 stock CP 3.3s. The pumps are stock, right out of the box, replacement pumps. If we're running the engine 5,500, the pumps are running 20% under that. They're running 80% engine speed. We're way over the maximum speed those pumps are good for. Time for some S&S pumps, I would say. Let's come back to 1,500 and whack this pup. That's politically incorrect, by the way. Let's bang this turkey. That's more Thanksgiving-ish. All right, we're around 1,500. Don't creep up on it. Okay, now just firewall it. Ah, you didn't get.
I chickened out.
Huh?
I chickened out.
You chickened out. Give me a better one.
Okay.
1,500. Thermostats are still open. Pull back when you see 4,500. Okay, stabilizing. Go for it. Okay. Okay, we got a throttle. We got a throttle response. Man, that thing's responsive. 540-inch blown alcohol Chevy. You got nothing on us. If this is a diesel. Let's put it to bed and look at some data. 666 horsepower. I don't know how I'm feeling about that, but I'm feeling really good about selling you cars. And cars is our charge air rating system. Let's have a look at the screenshot right where we hit 666 horsepower. Here's our charge air rating system laid out over 4 gauges. These 4 screens could be on 1 gauge. In other words, You would just push the lower right button and it would change pages. So you wouldn't need 4 iDashes to do this, but it's pretty damn impressive when you have them. Our ambient gave us an ambient air density of 72.5 pounds per thousand. I'm not going to be talking about boost other than a reference number here. So that's our starting point. That contributed 41% of the final manifold air density. Next, we get to the compressor, the Whipple itself. It contributed 50.7 pounds of air density and is responsible for nominally 29%. The intercooler outperformed the blower with 53.5 pounds increase in air density and right at 30% of the MAD produced. The compressor and the intercooler combined together to form boost air density. That's our third gauge. The total boost air density increase is 104 pounds per thousand, or 59% of the manifold air density. That 104 pounds of air density, of course, comes from the Whipple supercharger and intercooler. So how do you calculate it? We look to the boost, which is 21.2 pounds, and the temperature increase, which is only 3.8 degrees over ambient. This becomes a highly efficient boost air system. The ambient air density plus the boost air density equals the manifold air density. Humidity is a factor here, and with our Air Mouse ambient air sensor, we can include humidity in the calculation. That's baked into all the numbers. But from here on, we're going to talk temperature, pressure, and density. First, let's talk about pressure. The initial pressure, the ambient pressure, was 14.45 pounds absolute pressure. The compressor adds 21.61 pounds. Now the pressure is 30.06 pounds. Intercooler drops a little pressure because you're forcing air through, and in this case, not a lot. We lost a little over a half a pound, and now our pressure is 35.52, and since the intercooler dumps right into the intake manifold, there's no further loss of pressure, so the final pressure is 35.52. Going to temperature, the initial temperature, which is ambient, 73.4 degrees. The compressor added 248 for a final of 322 at the compressor outlet, so it's adding a bit of heat there. The intercooler removed 245 degrees, so now we're back down to 77.2 degrees, and that's our final temperature in the intake manifold. Let me reiterate how important this intercooler is, or any intercooler is. Done right, the intercooler can totally sweep up after the supercharger and bring the temperature down to ambient, or if you're running ice water or something super cold as the coolant running through, it can be below ambient. That speaks to air density, and air density is the game here. That thing recovered 245 degrees for a final temperature of 77 degrees. This is what I call the density contribution. This is all in pounds per thousand cubic feet that the engine's pumping through the cylinders. Ambient air density, 72.5. The compressor adds 51. The intercooler adds 53.5. Our boost air system, the combination of all those guys, adds 104.3 pounds. And the final exact number, 176.8. That's your manifold air density. Now, we're not making a hellacious manifold air density number. I mean, I've seen them 400, 500, guys with compound turbos, etc., especially at high altitude where you start with a lot less ambient. But the whole boost air system is about taking ambient air density and a lot of cubic feet of it and compressing it, condensing it, so every cubic foot that goes into the cylinder has the highest amount of oxygen. Here's the players. This percent power contribution says it all. 41% of the power came from the ambient air density. 29% of the power came from the supercharger. 30% of the power came from the intercooler. Combined, the boost air system, we call the combined output boost air density. That's produced by the boost air system, and that's 59%. So the 41% add plus the 59% bad equals the 100% mad. Manifold air density rules and boost drools. So 666 horsepower might sound like a good number. It certainly is if you're driving a diesel on the street. And this may be a record for a blown 7-liter diesel. I don't know. But I want twice that. I want 13 something. This is a monster truck project. And there's a new wrinkle coming, which is these mud trucks, which are kind of like a monster truck on a diet. I'd love a taste of that too. So next, we're going to go with 2 precision turbos, a custom-made intercooler, blowing into the Whipple and through its intercooler and into that 7-liter Duramax. It's just getting good. I suggest you subscribe.